Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Right. Yeah. Excuse me. We'll give it a couple minutes for people to show up. Uh, and I'm sure you can see my screen. Zoom is telling me you can see my screen. Um, let's see. In just another minute or two. Hope you're all having a great day. All right. Let's get started here. I want to thank you all for showing up today. Had a lot of people sign up. As usual, not everybody who signs up shows up, but you'll get if you did sign up, you'll get a recording whether you showed up or not. So no big deal there. I'm gonna run through uh, the framework I've got for you today, and then we'll have Q&A. But let me tell you a little bit of about myself. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. I'm not a former broker who moved into coaching. I spent 36 years on the client side of this business. as a principal developer, capital partner across more than $2 billion in transactions, primarily office industrial, but I did do some retail, and I had one really, really bad hospitality deal that literally gave me PTSD. I mean, literally gave me PTSD. So, not I can't be expert in hospitality, but I, had success in the other three. During that, my tenure, I hired hundreds of brokers. And I also fired a lot of brokers when things went sideways. So, what I'm teaching today is the viewpoint of your client, and what I learned from, being a client, and, what made brokers successful and what didn't make brokers successful. Today, we'll have 40 minutes of framework, then live Q&A until your questions are answered. And the promise today is by the end, you'll know how to build a pipeline that keeps moving when you don't feel like moving it. One that doesn't collapse, the week you get busy, sick, just burned out. You'll leave with us in one number that tells you whether it's healthy or not. And I'm sure you've all suffered from that in one way, shape, or another, where all of a sudden things are just totally dried up. And hopefully today, I'm going to give you the tools so that doesn't happen again. Um, so let's get into it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your pipeline isn't empty. It's running on you, your energy, your mood, your good weeks, in some cases, your good looks. And the day you stop cranking, it stops moving. And the whole job today is to change that, to make it run without you. What what most brokers actually have what I call a hero pipeline. It's powered by your effort instead of a system. It typically looks productive. You're busy, you're grinding right up until the week you're buried in the closing, or you're sick, or you've got a problem deal, or you're just burned out. You're working way too many deals, trying to get them to the finish line, and then nothing advances. That's it's not a discipline problem. You're not lazy. It's a design problem. And the pipeline was built to need you every single day. And if you're not on every single day, it's a problem. So this is how it plays out. Right after you close the deal, you prospect hard. You know, the bar's full. A few weeks in, you're servicing that deal, and then prospecting fades. Then the deal goes quiet, and prospecting is at zero. The pipeline empties, and because you stop filling it, and then comes the panic restart. And we've all been there. Pipeline mirrors your attention, and your attention spikes and crashes. And every one of those restarts has a price. And I like to call it the motivation tax. It's not just the deals you lose in the dry stretch, it's that every time you're rebuilding momentum from zero, you're just like starting from scratch. Cold outreach, cold relationships, cranking the flywheel from a dead stop. I watched this for years on the hiring side. Brokers who worried were never the ones that had a bad month. Everyone has those, and hopefully they're few and far between. But the good ones had good months and bad months miles and miles apart, because that gap told me the machine only ran when they were up. The steady producers weren't more motivated. They taking the motivation out of it. And so today we're going to talk about how we build a system that doesn't rely on motivation. The standard fix for all of this is, typically they say, motivated, hustle harder. And that's exactly what keeps you on the roller coaster. The answer isn't more willpower, it's a system. So let's reframe. The old way, stay motivated, hustle harder, that's willpower. The new way is remove motivation from the equation. That's a design challenge. Discipline you have isn't a discipline, it's a system you don't have. The goal is a pipeline that doesn't care what kind of day you're having. So here's the framework. And I call it the standing pipeline because it stands on its own. Four parts, one machine, and it runs on rules, not your mood, your busyness, your you know burnout, whatever. So number one is the input floor. This is a daily prospecting minimum that runs on your worst day, not your best. It's what you can do every single day. Um, Two, you have defined stages. Deals, you advance your deals in your pipeline by criteria, not by memory or mood. Three, the conversion math, and we'll get into this detail with a system I've put together here in a second. But you know how many inputs equals one close? It's like how many times, how many emails do I have to send? How many phone calls do I have to send? And they work through the pipeline and they end up becoming a client. So we'll talk about that and I'll show you what that is. And what you'll know exactly what you have to do to be able to end up with, four deals, six deals or whatever. And then lastly is a weekly cadence, a 30-minute standing review, sort of a hot wash, like they say in, special operations, whatever, that where you sit down every week and review, where you are. Um, and so you keep this just cranking on a weekly basis and you keep on going. And if you build all four, the pipeline stuff stops needing you and it starts running almost on its own. Obviously, there's a lot necessary from you, but you start creating this system and it becomes, like working out at the gym every day. And it's just like boom, 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 keeps going. So one of the other things is sort of a quick sort of, sort of key number that you can take a look at just, to see how you're doing, um, to tell if if your system is really working or not. It's called the coverage ratio. And it's a multiple of your annual goal sitting live in your pipeline right now. So if you can't name that number, you're forecasting by feel. And that number is typically about 3x. So if you've got a pipeline, if your goal is to do $500,000 in a year, and if you don't have 1.5 million sitting in your pipeline at some stage, you're probably not going to hit your goals for the year. So, this is just a quick down and dirty sort of number to take a look at to see, is my pipeline healthy? And if it is, if I'm at 3x or somewhere around there, I'm probably going to hit my goal. And, it's a number that you want to revisit all the time. But in reality, most of my clients and most of the people I work with start out sitting at 1x of that number. So, all right. Okay. And this is a big measurement shift. The vanity question is how busy I am, and busy feels like progress. The real question is, how many deals do I have in the pipeline? Um, and that really tells the truth. A full calendar can sit on a very, very empty pipeline. And that coverage ratio will tell you exactly how realistic, you are. If you're at 3x, you're getting close to it. So the question is, how do you build all that without losing, weeks and weeks and weeks? I've developed a tool that I use with my clients that does all this heavy lifting. And let me show you how that works. So I'm going to here and stop the share, and we'll go to a new share. All right. And we'll wait for it to pop up here. Now, this is just an Excel spreadsheet that I've created, and I actually use it for my business, and all my clients use it, but it goes by a bunch of different names, but for this purposes, it's the pipeline system builder. Um, and for about the next 10 or 15 minutes, we'll go through this and how to set up the whole system. So first, what you want to do is set up the input floor. And make sure you can all see this. I know it's sort of small. It's a big spreadsheet, but I'll sort of talk you through this. But the inputs are such that you can define your product type here, the type of representation that you do here. You can choose between a large metro area and a small metro area, and because there's subtle differences between the two in terms of how this calculates, and you can add in a safety margin. And then you can plug in your goals. And so in this situation, we're doing tenant rep in a large metro area for office. And up until this time, this specific tenant rep person has done their average deal value in gross commissions is $25,000. Their goal over the next 6 months is to hit $500,000. And during that period of time, they're going to work 24 weeks. 6 months is typically obviously 26 weeks, but they're going to take some time off, and the start date goes here. Okay. Those are pretty much all the calculations that you have to do. Then it gives you, the number of deals you have to do, and the weighted conversion. And this is starting out cold. I mean, this is, doesn't, pertain to anything in your pipeline right now. This is, if you wanted to start cold to make $500,000, like out of the chute, this is what your weighted ratio of success would be, which basically says, you'd get 3.5 deals out of 100 different prospects. And this is all calculated by, let me go to here's all the channels. And in this case, I made it real simple. It's, 20% of your outreach is going to be cold email, 20% is going to be warm email, 20% is going to be cold calling, and then 20% is going to be warm calling. So this is then calculates this all out. Let me put on my glasses because it's really small on my computer so I can see it too. So here's that number that we just talked about, okay? 171 touches, and it's broken down between those four different channels that we want. During the 6 month period of time, you have to reach out to 4,000 people to hit this $500,000 number. That hopefully this effort, weekly, and then over this 6 month period of time will get you down to, 61, initial calls, whether it's in person or on the phone or whatever, with what we would typically call a qualified prospect. you break it down to, 3 a week kind of thing. And it also does, a rough estimate of the number of hours it's going to take to do this 171. So, and so this is what I call, we'll go to the outputs page. Oh, let's see. But this shows your, let me try to get this down. So this shows exactly, your pipeline. And this shows what the actual survival rates of your different types of channels that you're using. So at the end of the day, your success rate in cold email, obviously not very high. So you get less than one deal, 0.55% out of 100. Warm email, obviously, your success rate is a lot better. Cold call, then again, slightly better than email, but not significantly better. And then warm calls, at 5.5% or whatever. And then these numbers are, total conversion. And then at the very bottom, we have, your overall success rate. So, but, here it breaks down your effort that you need. So here's, the total touches for the 6 month period of time. Here's, 19, you have to need to reach out to 1,900 different prospects in cold email. You've got 432 in warm email, cold calls, 1,304 there, and then 276 there. And here's your weekly, what we call our, RO, our sort of prospecting minimum. So this gives you, sort of your baseline. So when we go back to, the quadrants, this is your minimum floor on a weekly basis. So, you need to do outreach to 170 some odd people, during that week. Now, I work, all my clients, we set this up and work with it. And, obviously some are much better at, doing this in 17 hours or less. Some, sometimes take a little bit more. We also get email systems set up, both cold and warm email systems set up. So, there's a lot of front end loading to get this stuff set up. But then once we get these sort of campaigns set up, we have them such that they pretty much run, on their own, to the point where you get responses and whatnot. So we, we this is just sort of where the rubber meets the road. And if you can accomplish this on a weekly basis, and I'm not saying that you need to do this every week, but what we have is also a tracking sheet to see how you're doing and how, you're doing on a weekly basis to get this stuff out the door. You can always do some catch up, but this will always give you, how you're doing and how you're doing against meeting your potential goals in this period of time, which is in this case $500,000 in 6 months. So, okay. One of the other things is in the and I don't want to switch back and forth, but I talked about was, defining the stages, this step number 2. And this was, this touches number was step number 1 in the system, the input floor. This is your, weekly non-negotiable prospecting minimum, and we call it, RO. And all my clients run this. Now, the next thing is defining the stages. And here we have all these stages defined, but you're, welcome to define all the stages that you want. But, here we have all these stages. This is the initial cold email send out, and then they're not labeled here, but these are your, first initial calls with this many, whatever. So you want to define these stages, and so when you go through your system, you want to define the stages, and then we'll talk about it in a little bit, is reviewing your stages to see how healthy your pipeline is. Okay. It's, and a lot of people do this in a CRM, and most of my clients do, but you need to understand where your deals are, where they are or where they aren't, and it's by rule. Okay, it's not sort of, oh, it's sort of, I've got sort of these deals or these deals or whatever. I was working with a client, working on their pipeline, and we sat down and had a very hard discussion about the pipeline, and the reality of where they really were from a, the standpoint of, how qualified and where they were in the pipeline. And, you know, that this client, had, probably 2x in terms of his pipeline, in terms of, probably covering his number that he wanted to hit. But when we went through it, in reality, it went down to about 1x. So you got to be hard, and have very specific requirement about how these folks move through your pipeline. Okay. Now the next thing, and this does this, but one of the things you want to make sure you're doing. Why did that blow up so big? Hold on. And so, we have here, sort of industry standard conversion rates for cold email, whatever, where you go. This is, you get 71%, responding, or not responding, but, you get 19% responding, whatever. And then you get out here, and this is, the conversion rate. But what you want, what we want to do is, when we start tracking, we want to start, step three is start running how well you're converting against this. This is the goal. But, once you get in running in this, system, we want to check, on a weekly basis, how you're doing against this, and where do we need to fix steps in the pipeline. Are we not responding to emails quickly enough, or are we not getting enough, responses out of the emails? What do we need to do with the emails? Are we being too pushy? Are we being, we taking the wrong tact with people, that kind of thing. Are we sort of dying on our initial calls or meetings? We go in and then crickets. What's happening there? So once we get, our sort of goals set up for how we're running, and what the expectations are for conversion, then we want to run the actual math to see how we're doing. And we'll take your stage to state rates and work on how many, inputs equal a close. And once you know the ratios that you're typically running, you can start tweaking, and you may have to run that number, that RO number up a little bit, or maybe you can back off on it a little bit. Maybe you've got some really good prospects. You've done, you've picked up and put, fed people into your pipeline, and you seem to be converting really, really well. I just had a client the other day start an email program, and he was hitting, he was getting about one every 10 emails. He was getting a meeting or a call, which is phenomenal. And about a month. And so, he could spend more, he obviously needed more time to be able to have these meetings. And so we could ratchet down based on the findings that we had with his success so far, his sort of weekly minimums. And now, he's having to do half the cold calls and half the cold emails or whatever, because, obviously later in his pipeline is quite full. So, we run the conversion math to see how the adjustments need to be. And then step four is we want to set the cadence and sort of hot wash how we're doing in the how we're progressing through this, how the conversions are going, where are folks in my stages, am I hitting my minimum numbers, whatever. And the cadence is, every week a 30-minute weekly review where every deal in your pipeline gets one of three verdicts kind of thing. Okay. What can I do to advance it? Should I stall it and not worry about it right now? Or should I kill it? Is this a real deal? And, you know, go through and, just really, cull your pipeline. Very few people do this. Everything sort of just sits in limbo a lot of times, but you need to do these three things to be, honest with yourself about where you're really going with this pipeline. So, and so all my clients have to do this on a weekly basis, kick people out, focus on the ones that they can advance and advance it quickly or
Thank
whatever.
you.
And then work through, and kill deals that you just don't seem to be going anywhere because there's just one, they may not be a physical drag, but a lot of times they're a mental drag. So we just like, okay, you're done, moving on, and let's focus on the things that we need to do. We check our conversions and making sure we're hitting our numbers. And then if we need to make adjustments to our weekly, sort of baseline touches, outreach, our own number, we do that. So, and I do that with my clients. Every 2 weeks, we have a check-in to see, what we need to do in terms of trying to tweak this a little bit better. All right, we'll go back to. So that's sort of an explanation, and I'll open up the questions. I sort of went through that pretty quick, but we'll go back to the slides here. So, okay, all right, get caught up on the slides. All right. So, here's what I talked about on, the doing the weekly pipeline review. Have you hit the daily minimums, tracked every single day, you know, gone through your pipeline in the stages in your pipeline, move every deal by criteria, not by gut. Check your coverages, ratios, whatever, and see how you're doing. And then making sure you do your 30-minute cadence, every week. It's one of the most important things that my clients do. So, and a system that you have to feel isn't really a system. So, the goal was never motivation. It's, if you put this into place, you're doing your daily minimums or whatever, you'll hit your numbers. You'll never, never, never have a question about where you are. And it's the real focus of putting a system in place versus sort of, I think I have a good pipeline kind of thing. The other thing is, the motivation trap. It's the good month that convinces you that you've, fixed your pipeline. You have a strong stretch, and the problem is that, if you don't have that system, it's a, false positive. As soon as you get busy again, the system's going to break, and you really don't have a system in the first place, but it's going to break. And you get into, the sort of feast or famine cycle and up and down, whatever. So if, you put in a system in place and you build up, this sort of cadence and, hit your minimums or whatever, you won't have to worry about motivation. Now, granted, you're going to have good days and bad days, but, in a week, you're going to have some really good days. And then, if you're working on a weekly basis, you'll be able to do this. And so that's the system. I mean, and all my clients run it. They're surprised. Um, you saw the numbers there, 170 outreaches. If you're doing email, it gets a lot quicker once you get systems set up in place. I had a tenant rep client that we set up, a cold outreach email system. And, he's a pretty senior guy and he's, done a lot of deals in his market. And we set up a campaign such that it would target buildings, all the tenants in a building where he's done a deal. And we set up, the whole system such that, it was an easy crossover. He could take, this building and then, just with a couple of little modifications to the campaign, set it up for another building and have it fill in, the new address and whatever. And then he, just fill in, feed in the prospects and boom, it was running. And we started doing that just a couple of days ago, and he sent out 10 emails and he got three meetings. So worked extremely well. So um, it's amazing how if you put this in place, how quickly and how quickly you'll see success and how quickly you can continue to have success as long as you keep working the system. Folks out there, if you have interest in doing something like this, I have yeah, be happy to do a free session with you and get a system set up for you. The link for that is right here. It goes to my calendar and it sets up a 30-minute meeting, and I'd be happy to run you through. I'll give you a copy of this planner, and we can run through and set this up, and you can keep it and play with it as much as you want. And then we can sit down and run through this, and we can get the system set up and get you off and running. So I will, and that will, I can't, where's my chat? I'll I got like 7 screens open right here to be able to bounce back and forth here. So hold on. Let me put that in the chat. Oh, come on, move. All right. You get stuck underneath put this in here. There you go. If that's of interest to you, go ahead, and I'll open it up to questions. So feel free to unmute yourself if you got a question. And I'll be happy to answer it.
Jeff, I
So
have a question for you. How are you? Thanks for doing
good.
this again
Hold on.
for
Let me
us.
turn up I could barely hear. Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you for doing this again, Jeff. I am Fabi with Colliers in Cleveland.
Hi, Fabi. How you
And
doing?
I'm doing good. This is my second session with you. I enjoyed the first one, but that one, unfortunately, we didn't get to record it. But thank you again for doing this. My question to you is from working with your clients, building their pipelines, what would be the best advice to you when you feel that your client has been like stuck? He's doing his pipeline for, 15 years in one way. It's like a golf swing, you know what I mean? You hit that golf swing and then you think you are doing right, but you're still playing a bad game. What would be the, advice that you do to kind of reinvent yourself?
I have that happen all the time. And one of the, I'll take a client. I've got a tenant rep client, and he's very successful. He runs his office, and he has a huge problem with cold email. And he is actually the person I mentioned about putting, earlier about, targeting the buildings. And what you have to do is, you're fighting, all this, you've been successful. And the back of your mind is like, what I've done has gotten me here. And so change is really, really difficult. And I'm not sure it's going to work. So the best thing to do, and what we did was when we built that email campaign, we targeted one building, and I think there were like 10 tenants that we sent it out, and we sat down in a call, and he uses Drive for his CRM, and we used Claude to do all the copy, and we built the pipeline, built the campaign. It was like 5 or 6 emails or whatever, with a couple of calls thrown in, and we built it together and sort of handheld him through the entire thing. And finally, we got it together, and he hit send, and he ended up getting, 3 calls out of it, of those ten initial emails. Um, so it's just baby steps. You can all sit there and remember when you got in this business and how hard you worked, and the calls you made and the meetings you went to and the frustration and whatever, and you got through it. But over a period of time, things have sort of gone by the wayside. It's like, if I made this many calls when I first started, I make these many calls these days or whatever. So my suggestion is just to, do an experiment, and that's what I did with him is like, okay, let's do it really, really small. And, we did it really, really small, and we struggled getting through the tech and, the setup and whatever, and it was, the frustration involved with that. But once we got it set up, and then all of a sudden we saw the success, it's like, hey, this works. It actually works. So that's the best way to do it.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I'll hang out as long as you got questions. So happy to answer. And if it doesn't pertain to anything we talked about today, I'm still happy to answer it. More than happy to. So Jared, yes, I have, and because I actually owned a resort in the Vail Valley for a long period of time. It's a very long story, but I owned it for a long time. I worked with brokers to buy it. I worked with brokers to sell it. Unfortunately, it's a long story, but yes, I have worked with hotel brokers before. So, and actually owned a resort. So, very familiar with the inner workings of hospitality, unfortunately, because it wasn't a very successful deal, but it was a bad learning experience. Any other questions? Anybody else? Well, if there's no other questions, I'll let you get on with the day. Thank you very much for showing up. I apologize, Fabi. Yeah, well, last time the last one I didn't have a recording. Um, I don't know what happened, but I made sure that this was recorded. I can see that it's being recorded, so you will definitely get a copy of this. And if you want feel free if you would like just to get a copy of the spreadsheet. Shoot me an email. I'll be happy to send you a copy of it, just so you can play around with it and see how it works. I'd be happy to send out a copy to you too. So feel free to shoot me an email and ask for it. You can send it. I'll put my email in the chat. Take out the spaces. Here's my email. And so shoot me an email. Hold on. All right. So there's my email. So feel free to reach out and shoot me an email if you'd like also. So, all
Thank you,
right.
Jeff.
Anything?
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Thank you, Fabi, for showing up. I appreciate it. And I apologize about the recording
No
last time.
worries. No, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
If you see what my screen looks like, I got my notes everywhere, and then I've got like two full screens of like the presentation and then the spreadsheet and trying to go over everything. For some reason, I just think I didn't hit record when I started the last one.
It
So,
happens.
all right.
All
Well,
right.
everybody take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.